Mid-July 1980 was the peak of the American summer. As the rest of the country battled the heat, law enforcement officials in Kern and Ventura County, Central California, were left to deal with two homicides occurring within days of each other on July 15th and 18th. It was a murder mystery that remained unsolved for decades before DNA technology provided the missing links that gave investigators the edge needed to catch a depraved killer. But who were the victims and how were they connected? Hello and welcome back to Mysterious Hook. Today, we go back in time to 1980s California in the intertwined cases of the Kern County and Ventura County Jane Does. But before we do that, please consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and clicking on the notification bell to get more solved, unsolved, and twisted cases straight to your inbox. Without further delay, let's dive in. Sun, sand, surf, and mountains. From golden shores to glamorous cities, California has it all and more. The West Coast state is undeniably a year-round attraction for tourists from all over the world. Whether you want to enjoy an afternoon taking in the bustling atmosphere of Venice Beach, or spend a day rubbing shoulders with celebrities in sun-kissed Los Angeles as you stroll down the Walk of Fame, California has a little something for everyone. But despite its magnetic charm, California also has its share of dark history. And today, we take a look at two such mysteries. On the morning of July 15, 1980, a group of maintenance workers in Delano, California made their way through the almond orchard for another day of work. As they approached the 13th row of trees, they took notice of what appeared to be a person curled up in a fetal position asleep on the ground. Curiosity compelled them to inspect further, and what they discovered left them reeling and rushing off to contact police immediately. It was the body of a woman who had clearly been murdered. Teams of investigators and crime scene technicians arrived at the almond plantation and began cordoning off the area to begin their investigation. The woman appeared to be of either Native American or Hispanic descent. Investigators immediately noted the lack of blood at the scene and soon found tire tracks that led up to and then away from where the body was found. Another clue was a discarded Michelob beer bottle. They theorized that their victim may have been picked up from a bar known as Ruby's, located in Lemoore, an hour away from the farm. Their investigation began immediately as they searched the plantation for clues to her identity. Detectives were dispatched to Ruby's to question staff and patrons of the identity of the woman or any suspicious activity, while other teams combed through the fields. By the afternoon, investigators had not found any of her personal belongings, and the people that were questioned by detectives were unable to provide much information about the woman. The body was transported to the county mortuary for a post-mortem examination. Examiners determined she had been murdered a day before being discovered. She had been assaulted before being stabbed. It was overkill with a total of 27 stab wounds, 18 to the chest and 9 defensive wounds on her arms and shoulders. For investigators, it was obvious she fought fiercely against her attacker. Her cause of death was recorded as sharp force trauma as her vital organs had been punctured. Without any form of identification, her fingerprints were taken and sent to the crime lab. However, after running her prints through various databases, there were no records found. The coroner began examining the body for clues that investigators could use in trying to identify her. She had 2 unique tattoos. One was a heart with the words "I love you, Shirley," and "Seattle." The other simply read "Mother" and "I love you." Scars were found on her abdomen which the examiner believed may have come from an operation or childbirth, and there was scarring on her buttocks. She also wore a prosthetic left leg due to an injury on her upper leg. Her entire set of upper teeth were missing and showed signs of being removed medically. The toxicology report showed that she had been intoxicated with a blood alcohol level of 0.3%. This strengthened the theory that she was possibly picked up from the bar Ruby's. A detailed profile was developed based on the examiner's findings. She was estimated to be between the ages of 25 to 35 and weighed 115 pounds with a height of 5 feet and 4 inches. She had black hair that was slightly curled and was of Native American descent. Her body showed signs of possibly having given birth at least once. The tattoos suggested that she was a native of Seattle, Washington, and that Shirley was either her real name or that of someone she loved dearly. The clothes she was wearing at the time of her death were a pink top, blue jeans, white shoes, and blue socks. Her body was kept in the county mortuary until she could properly be identified and was given the placeholder name of Kern County Jane Doe. Investigators had also lifted fingerprints from the discarded beer bottle found at the scene and made plaster impressions of the tire tracks found near the victim's body. The forensics team had also taken the clothes of the victim and were able to extract biological material from the items. They also commissioned the medical examiner to provide the nail clippings of the victim in order to test for possible DNA that may have been transferred during the attack. These were all sent for DNA profiling while the investigation continued. But she was just the first victim in what was going to become a decades-long mystery. 3 days after the discovery of the Kern County Jane Doe, law enforcement officials were alerted to another murder in neighboring Ventura County. The body of another female was discovered in the Thousand Oaks High School parking lot on July 18, 1980 in Westlake. When investigators arrived, they noted that the woman was either of Native American or Hispanic descent. She had been partially disrobed and had several visible defensive wounds on her arms. A search of the crime scene indicated that she was murdered elsewhere, as there was no significant amount of blood near the scene. It was also believed that she was brought to the parking lot and dragged from a vehicle, as there was a trail of blood from the edge of the tarmac surface to where the body was found. Investigators were aware that a similar attack had occurred 3 days prior in neighboring Kern County. Although the similarities were striking between both crime scenes, at the time investigators did not believe they were linked. A search of the nearby area provided no clues for investigators, as there were no tire tracks to be found and no personal belongings of the victim located near the crime scene. The school custodian who had found the body was questioned, but he could not provide any further details except that he had found her while going about his general duties at the school. It was unmistakable to investigators at the time that she was also pregnant. Her body was sent off to the county coroner for further examination. At the coroner's office, the medical examiner determined that the victim had been killed 12 hours before her body was discovered. She had been stabbed 16 times and then strangled to death. The victim had also suffered a brutal assault. The wounds on her arm showed that she had fought her attacker to the very end. The coroner determined that she was between the age range of 20 to 30. Her estimated height was between 5 feet 1 to 5 feet 3 inches and weighed between 100 to 115 pounds. The coroner provided investigators with a detailed profile that included her description and distinguishable marks on her body. The victim was primarily Native American, with some Hispanic, Caucasian, Sub-Saharan, and Asian ancestry. She had brown eyes, black hair with bleach blonde tips, and penciled eyebrows as she had shaved her natural brows off. She had a large amount of dental work done and also had pierced ears. She had several scars and birthmarks, including 2 vaccination scars on her left arm and a scar on the left knee. They were able to determine that she was 5 months pregnant with a male child. The baby had appeared to be well nourished and received proper prenatal care prior to the attack. An episiotomy scar also suggested she may have given birth to at least 1 child before this. Her fingerprints were taken and a search through national databases came up empty. Like the Kern County Jane Doe, she too had no criminal history. The victim had been clothed in a white t-shirt, black bra, white underwear, and red pants. These, along with her fingernail clippings, were all taken and sent off to extract any foreign DNA that could be used to identify her murderer. DNA had also been extracted from the unborn child to conduct a paternity test. While investigators waited on the results, the county coroner gave her the placeholder name Ventura County Jane Doe. Over the next few weeks, authorities in both Kern County and Ventura County worked extensively to uncover the identities of both women. Kern County officials revisited the bar and interviewed more people in and around the area. Investigators also made use of the local media to appeal to anyone who may have known either Jane Doe. It was then that they received a tip from an anonymous female caller who alleged to have known the woman found in the orchard. According to the caller, she went by the name Becky or Rebecca Ochoa, had tattoos similar to that of the victim, and she worked as a waitress at a bar. However, this tip led nowhere. Other people came forward claiming that she had been seen in and around Lemoore for several weeks before her death. According to these witnesses, the victim had worked at a local apple orchard as a farmhand. This lead, too, failed to produce any useful information in the end. Investigators then took to visiting local tattoo parlors, hoping they would recognize the work and be able to identify the victim. A tattoo artist from Bakersfield said that he did not know the work personally, but provided details to a Los Angeles tattoo parlor that used a similar technique in their designs. He also explained that the area had a large community of Native Americans. Following this lead, detectives set off for Los Angeles. After questioning the artists in the parlor, they realized that their Jane Doe did not have any links to the area, and they were now back at square one. In Ventura County, detectives worked with the theory that their Jane Doe had been kidnapped while hitchhiking near the College of Sequoias in Visalia, California. Investigators also used the media as a way to discover more information about their victim. But unlike the Kern County Jane Doe, no one seemed to recall their victim. Her dental records were distributed to several dental labs, but there was still no match. Without any new leads, these avenues were quickly drying up. Investigators' hopes were dashed again when the paternity tests from the unborn child also proved to be a dead end. The DNA extracted from the unborn child was used to create a profile that could be linked to existing criminal profiles of the CODIS database. However, it seemed that the child's father did not have a criminal history. DNA testing was still in its infancy in the 1980s, and investigators had exhausted every lead possible in trying to identify both women. Both the Jane Does were buried in county cemeteries, but their stories were not forgotten by the investigators who continued to work to restore their identities. The foreign DNA from both women was discovered to be that of an unknown male. Investigators, though, continued to keep both investigations separate, believing the murders were pure coincidence. This was filed away, and over the next 30 years, DNA results would periodically be submitted by investigators, who were given the reins of the cold cases in both counties. A fresh set of eyes meant a new approach to the case. Investigators were sure that the murderer would have committed more crimes since 1980. With technological advancements, it was possible their suspect was now on their systems. In 2008, Kern County officials were finally able to find a match to the DNA recovered from their Jane Doe. It had been linked to a 51-year-old man named Wilson Chouest, who was already in custody in California. Wilson Claude Chouest Jr. was born on December 2, 1951, in New Orleans, Louisiana. According to reports, Wilson's childhood was tough as his parents were always at odds with each other. When he was younger, Wilson had a desire to become a priest. But after being expelled from a Catholic school for beating another student, those ambitions were dashed. He soon gave in to the darker side of life and began abusing drugs. At the age of 18, he enrolled in the army, but was discharged after being deemed unsuitable for service. After returning home, Wilson decided to get married and settle down in Los Angeles in 1969. The couple seemed happy enough and even had a daughter. But cracks in the marriage appeared as Wilson turned to a life of crime. His first major crime occurred in October 1977. He had given a lift to a young woman who had been standing on the side of a road in Los Angeles. Once she got in, he then abducted her and drove her to a remote location. Wilson then assaulted her and attempted to strangle her to death. He assumed she died after she had fallen unconscious. After he left her body in a ditch, she regained her senses and immediately reported him to the nearest police station. Unable to escape the charges, Wilson made a deal with the prosecutors and was charged with abduction in November 1977. He was paroled in June 1980. It wouldn't last long, though. In August 1980, just 2 months after his release, he committed a robbery. That same month, he attempted to abduct another woman outside the College of Sequoias in Visalia. He had threatened her with violence if she refused to cooperate, but his plan was foiled by 2 witnesses who were walking by at the same time. In September 1980, he went on to abduct and assault another woman who he released after she told him she was married. He was ultimately caught and convicted for all 3 crimes. He was sentenced to 12 years to life in prison that same year. Wilson, though, was paroled in 2004 after serving 24 years, but the committee reversed their decision after concluding that he showed no remorse. He was, however, eligible for another parole hearing in 2016. While still behind bars, investigators were able to link Wilson's DNA to that of the DNA profile recovered from the Kern County Jane Doe. However, he was not immediately charged, and there was never a reason given for this. In 2012, having heard how officials in Kern County linked Wilson to an unsolved murder from July 1980, Ventura County officials submitted the DNA profile of their cold case suspect to CODIS to test against any possible matches to convicts already on the system. In January 2013, they had a match. Their Jane Doe had also been linked to Wilson Chouest through DNA found on her clothes and fingernails. It baffled investigators in both counties as they had spent all these years investigating both cases whose similarities were striking but never linked. The fight for justice, though, was far from over. Although DNA had linked Wilson to both murders, it had still not been able to identify both the Jane Does. When the case was brought to the district attorney's office in Ventura County, one of the attorneys opted not to pursue the cold case with unknown victims. Senior Deputy District Attorney John Barrick, though, was not willing to give up. He wanted to prosecute Wilson for the murders of both Kern County and Ventura County Jane Does. Under the laws of murder, I don't have to prove their identity. I just have to prove that they're a human being. I thought it was worth the effort. Because if we don't, then these women will never get the justice they deserve, even if we don't know their names. And there's a good possibility that Wilson is going to get out, and that is not a person who deserves to be out among law-abiding citizens, said Barrick. While still in custody, Wilson Chouest was transferred to Ventura County on September 23, 2015 by a court order. While being held at the county jail, he was charged and arrested with 3 counts of murder, the deaths of both Jane Does and the death of the unborn child of Ventura County Jane Doe. From the outset, Wilson denied all responsibility for the assault and murders of both women. For the next 3 years, Barrick, along with several prosecutors from both Kern County and Ventura County, worked to provide a compelling argument that would see Wilson pay for his crimes. His trial began on May 14, 2018. 3 of the women who survived his attacks testified in court and described Wilson as being predatory in nature. Their testimonies were similar in the way they had been approached by Wilson and lured into his car. Another witness who came forward was Patrick Scott Bell. Patrick had been a teenager in 1980 and had often stayed with Chouest, who was a family friend. He told the court of how Wilson had confessed to him that he had killed and dumped the body of an unknown woman. He also explained that he and his brothers had helped Wilson clean his car one evening, and when confronted by their mother, Carolyn Bell lied that Wilson had hit a deer. This confession was corroborated by Carolyn Bell both in a previous interview from 2013 and in court. After the confessions, prosecutors then used physical evidence that was found at the Kern County crime scene. DNA and fingerprints taken from the discarded beer bottle had been previously matched to Wilson. The DNA extracted from the Jane Doe's clothes and fingernails also proved a positive match. Wilson's defense attorney, Andrei Nintchev, presented a weak argument by stating his client and the women had consented to intimacy. He also argued that there was no physical evidence from the Ventura County crime scene to prove Wilson was actually there. After a 2-week-long trial, Wilson was found guilty of the murders of both adult victims on May 31, 2018. The jury voted unanimously in favor of a guilty verdict. However, they could not convict him for the murder of the unborn child, as the laws referenced by the prosecution in order to find him guilty of the murder were only changed after 1994. The death penalty was not pursued due to Wilson's age and the lack of witnesses testifying on his behalf. On July 12, 2018, Wilson was sentenced to serve 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He is currently serving out his sentence at the California Substance Abuse Treatment Facility and State Prison in Corcoran. Although Wilson was convicted and charged in the murders of both Jane Does, it did not bring investigators any closer to giving them their names back. But DNA testing had now advanced substantially since the 1980s. In Ventura County Coldcase investigator Steve Rhodes knew that a new genetic genealogy testing method was being used to identify suspects from decades-old cold cases. It had put the Golden State Killer behind bars. It could surely help identify the victims. In partnership with the DNA Doe Project, DDP, an all-volunteer group that makes use of genetic genealogy to identify John and Jane Does, both the Kern County and Ventura County officials submitted their DNA samples for genetic testing. The DDP has been credited with positively identifying a victim of serial killer John Wayne Gacy. So far, the DDP has been able to find locations and surnames of distant relatives that may be related to the Ventura County Jane Doe. These have been listed on their website and Facebook page and include Southern Texas, Central Mexico, Northern New Mexico, Indigenous California, and Guatemala. She has still not been identified by relatives. In 2021, investigators were able to find the father of her unborn child. It is believed he is an immigrant from Honduras who had ties to the Central American community within the Koreatown district of Los Angeles. Investigators were unable to make contact with him and get any information regarding their Jane Doe. They are, however, actively pursuing any leads and are urging relatives to come forward to volunteer their DNA. The Kern County Jane Doe proved a bit more difficult as the DNA retrieved had degraded over time and it took a while to find anything that could be used. Her investigation began in May 2019. The DDP found that the victim was indigenous, with parents likely from Maquachese, Alberta, Canada. The problem was that a very few indigenous people had provided their DNA profiles to genealogy websites. An appeal was made on the DDP Facebook page requesting people of indigenous ancestry to upload their DNA in order to help solve the case. This appeal was seen by Violet Soosay, who had been searching for her missing aunt, Shirley Ann Soosay, for decades. Violet submitted her DNA to GED Match in February 2020. After, testing confirmed that Violet was in fact a close relative of the Kern County Jane Doe. The DNA Doe Project made the announcement in April 2021 that Shirley Ann Soosay had finally been identified. She was 35 years old when she was murdered. Shirley was born on February 6, 1945, on the Sampson Cree Nation Reserve in Alberta, Canada. She had 7 siblings who were all part of a close-knit family unit. Shirley was just 14 years old when her father passed away. This caused financial difficulties as the family could not handle the responsibilities of maintaining their ranch. She chose to eventually leave the reservation in search of a job to support her family. Shirley initially intended to move to the nearby city of Edmonton, but ended up moving to Vancouver, British Columbia. Here, she would eventually get married to a man named Adam Miscu in 1963 and gave birth to 2 boys and a girl. But life did not get any easier. After a turbulent few years, her marriage ended and all 3 of her children were taken away and placed in foster care before being adopted. She was unable to regain custody of her children and became homeless. Shirley turned to alcohol and substance abuse to cope with her depression. She sometimes returned to Alberta, but her family had noticed the change in her personality. The last time she was seen by her relatives was in 1977 when she returned for her brother's funeral. She expressed her desire to not return to Alberta, but did mention that she would be visiting a friend in Seattle, Washington. Allegedly, it was Shirley's mother who asked her daughter to get tattoos that would distinguish her from other people and make it easy to identify her if something happened. Shirley maintained contact with her family through letters, but that ceased after June 1980. Family members searched the Vancouver area for decades, but eventually resorted to visiting cemeteries, believing she had died. Following the discovery, Violet Soosay said that she had made her grandmother a promise to find Shirley and return her to the family. Her remains were flown to Edmonton Airport on May 26, 2022. Before her casket was returned to her family, members of the Tule River Tribe of California held a ceremony with blessings and songs. Officials from the Kern County Sheriff's Office joined them in saying their final goodbye. For Violet, it was a relief to finally fulfill the promise she made. Shirley Ann Soosay was laid to rest at her family's resting place in Riverside Cemetery on May 27, 2022. Violet now encourages Indigenous people to train in DNA research so they too can conduct their own forensic investigations. She continues to work with investigators to help other Indigenous families find their missing loved ones through a genetic genealogy database. That is the hope I want to give to people in similar situations as mine, she said. As impossible as the task seemed in 1980, investigators' fervent pursuit of justice combined with the advancements made in DNA technology and testing has finally brought a killer to justice and peace to family who had been searching for far too long for their loved one. So far, more than half the battle has been won, but as technology progresses, hope remains in identifying the Ventura County Jane Doe. Today's case has proven that dogged determination can lead to amazing results. What are your thoughts on the progress made by technology in helping identify and bring closure to families who have spent years searching for answers about the whereabouts of their missing loved ones? Let us know in the comments below and make sure to like and subscribe for more like this. Until next time, thanks for watching and stay safe.